So I read about this study, a study done by psychologists Sarah Brosnan and Franz de Waal. And it was a study done on capuchin monkeys. And in the study, they found that monkeys hate the idea of being disadvantaged. A monkey in isolation is happy to eat either a grape or a slice of cucumber. But a monkey who sees that she's received a cucumber while her partner received a grape reacts with anger. In fact, she might even hurl her cucumber from her cage. Some primates, they conclude, dislike inequity. They hate getting the short end of the stick. And this instinctive aversion to getting less than others has been found not only in chimpanzees, but in dogs, and also, of course, in human beings. Ours is a culture that demands fairness. It measures by fairness how much one has or is given or what one thinks they deserve. And when our sense of fairness is challenged, our response can be defensive. We can get angry, we can harbor resentment, we can find that we're envious of those who get something that we don't have. Sometimes we react to the fairness of others or their experiences of inequity with justice. If we notice that somebody else is being treated unfairly, it's good for us to speak up. But most of the time, if we're honest, we're the ones that we're looking out for. We are the ones, like the primates, who want to make sure that we're getting our fair due. And we compare ourselves to others, to what they have, what they do, what they get, and we decide whether or not they're really deserving of it. Are they worthy of it? And when we witness great acts of generosity, especially when these acts of generosity appear to be at our expense or directed to those that seem unworthy, we can feel it in our bodies. We can react viscerally. We want to be recognized as worthy and appreciated for what we've done and how hard we've worked, for our contributions and more. But honestly, sometimes we don't get what we expected, or more often, we don't get what we think we deserve. In our Exodus story today, you heard how the Israelites crossed the Red Sea and they had this expectation for what freedom from slavery was going to be like. So when they found themselves in the wilderness and anxious and hungry, they complained. What was God thinking? This wasn't what they signed on for. This wasn't what they wanted or what they deserved. And then today's parable tells us about this vineyard owner who hires laborers, offering them a fair day's wage of a denarii. And how, as the day progresses, he hires more and more and more and more laborers. And then, at the end of the day, pays them all equally, regardless of how many hours they work. Now, how many of you, like me, have been outside of a Home Depot or outside of a Lowe's and seen the day workers in the parking lots? So immediately I thought about them, and I thought, wow, if I came to the parking lot at 8 a.m. and I hired them, that I would be expected to pay them a full day's wage. But if I came at noon, and let's say I came and I wanted them to trim my tree or cut down a tree or take out a tree stump, would it be fair to only pay them a half-day wage? Should I not maybe think about paying them for the work they do rather than on some scale? I don't know. But when at the end of the day, regardless of how things go, we have to make these decisions. We have to discern, are we going to be generous or are we going to grumble about it? The ones that came early to work for that vineyard owner grumbled. They said, "These last only worked an hour, and you made them equal to us, and we've worked in the heat all day." So what do you hear in their complaint? Maybe you feel their frustration. Maybe you can align with it. Maybe you've had a similar experience. Or maybe their sense of fairness has been challenged, because we human beings all operate on a sense of fairness. If their society understands that one gets paid for what one does, and one doesn't get paid for what one doesn't do, then this action of this vineyard owner would seem strange and really make no sense. It just doesn't seem fair. But I wonder if their complaint is truly about the money. I wonder if maybe there was some other issue. Because although they had already agreed to a daily wage, they seemed to think they deserved more. They made a decision that they were worth more. And then their statement really stings. You have made them equal to us. And you hear in it their disdain for others getting something that they didn't get, or getting something more than they got. And the owner's response, of course, is, I choose to be generous. Of course, we know he was generous with them, paying them a fair wage. But the question, that leading question, are you envious? Are you envious because I was generous? Envy arises when we don't feel that we have what we need, or what we want, or that we somehow don't have enough. The Israelites were hungry and they needed food, but rather than turn to God, they attacked God's messengers, blaming them for the situation. And the laborers who were paid fairly now turn around and boldly resent others to whom generosity was given. Certainly, my friends, all of us have had times when we mutter a complaint, using the words, it's not fair. And that's because it's true. Life isn't fair. Things aren't always fair. People are not always fair to us. Systems in our country and in our world are not set up to be fair to everyone. Most of them are set up to be fair to a particular group of people. We can perceive situations as unfair when we believe that we're being treated unjustly, or when we perceive a lack of equity or fairness about how resources or opportunities or consequences get distributed. And these feelings of unfairness can trigger within us a lot of emotion, causing us to lash out and become bitter, to harbor resentment. The Greek translation of the question, are you envious because I am generous, is this: is your eye evil because I am good? So think about it. Have you ever given somebody the evil eye? Have you ever glared at someone when you thought that they'd done something that was wrong or unfair or unjust? We all know, though, that evil does not sit just in the eyes. Where does evil sit? In the heart. Indeed. So we notice we are people who are hardwired to compare ourselves to one another. We notice the successes and the failures of one another, and we use them to determine our place and others' place in the social or institutional hierarchies that we operate in. But sometimes we are the recipients of unexpected and even absurd generosity. And I want you, as I continue to speak, I'd like you just to think about maybe there was a time in your life when you have received generosity that was unexpected, that just kind of took you by surprise and that seemed over the top. So back in the 1990s, I worked in the corporate sector as a travel and meetings manager. And when I first decided to go out on my own and began to freelance, I was inexperienced with being a sole proprietor, and I didn't really have a clue what I should charge for my services. And so naively, I began by charging an hourly rate of $23 an hour, which I made $20 an hour in the corporate sector, so I added $3. I wasn't thinking about all my overhead or the expenses of benefits and all that stuff. I just wanted to get hired. And so, of course, the first company that I came to work for and that hired me as a freelancer hired me in a second because I was cheap. I was good, but I was cheap. So when I came to the second company, which happened to be DirecTV, I decided I would brave it up and I would ask for a higher rate. So I came to meet with the manager, and when she asked me my fee, I responded, $30 an hour. And she smiled at me, and she looked down, and then she looked up at me, and she said, how about 40? And you can imagine the look that was incredulous on my face. Oh my gosh. And I just took a deep breath because I could not believe that some company had decided to be so generous to pay me more than what I asked for. Even though maybe someplace inside I believed I was worth it, I didn't have the confidence to ask. And so it felt amazing to receive that generosity. And I smiled, and I graciously accepted the offer. Now, of course, on the other side of this is the truth that people do not always treat us well. Sometimes people try to rip us off. Sometimes people are unfair and don't want to pay us what we are due. We live in a transactional economy. We live in an economy where one is hired to do a job for an agreed-upon wage based on knowledge, experience, difficulty, and more. And sometimes in the workplace, we discover that someone else who's doing the same exact job is being paid more than us or less than us. And that can cause in us gratitude for what we have, but it can also, if we're on the other side, cause us to be really angry and envious. We would not expect to encounter an employer that pays like the landowner. Can you imagine it? We just don't understand it inside of our world. But God's economy isn't a transactional economy. God's economy is a gift economy. And it is God who bestows gifts upon God's people without discretion, without rules, without comparison. God doesn't sit there and say, well, Laurel, how did you behave? And Peter, how did you behave? And okay, let's see which one of you gets more. It doesn't work that way. Those of us who have been people of faith, Christians, the longest, don't get more of God's grace and love than those who walk in the door today and become a Christian. Everyone gets God's fullness of love, and there is no cutting back. And I think that you and I get this in the context of church. I think we really do understand that God's love is for all. But somehow, when we're out in the world, it's hard to escape comparing ourselves to one another. And it's really hard to not compare our situations to one another and to not find ourselves frustrated or envious about things. The world makes more sense to us when we understand the hierarchies and our place in them. But the good news is that in God's economy, everyone is equal. We all are provided for because God chooses to give to us all equally. And we don't get to sit back and say, but I deserve more. Nor do we get to look at somebody else and say, you're not worthy of it. Neither of those are ours to say. What we do get to do is because we receive beautiful generosity from our God, like the Israelites received from God, like the vineyard laborers received from the owner, we who receive gracious generosity have the opportunity to be bearers of absurdly gracious generosity. We can practice extending generosity to the others and maybe not get so irritated. So what would it look like for you to be absurdly generous? Think about it. How might you choose to give to others in a way that surprises them, delights them, express profound care for them, or like the DirecTV manager did for me, amazes me and reminds me of my value? If we can trust that what we've been given by God is enough, that we don't need more and we don't need to covet what each other has, then we can find ourselves grateful. We can take what God has given us, use it to the best we can, give thanks, and then be more generous with others. So today I call you to consider, how can you step out into the world and extend generous love? How can you be absurdly generous with others? Amen.